A thin, gray mist curls along the riverbanks, clinging to every hollow and stone, as dawn creeps reluctantly over the sleeping village. The air is sharp, biting at bare skin, and the first light catches on frost that carpets the thatched roofs, glinting like shards of glass. A lone woman kneels beside the cracked wooden well, her fingers raw and numb from the bitter cold, pressing against the rough edge as if it could anchor her to the waking world. She lifts her head, and through the veil of mist, her eyes find her children huddled beneath threadbare cloaks, their small bodies trembling with both cold and hunger. Tiny hands clutch fragments of bread, the crumbs seeming almost too precious to hold, yet they do not let go. Around them, the village exhales its slow, measured rhythm. Wooden shoes clatter against frost-hardened paths, a metallic echo in the quiet morning, while the whisper of prayers to saints drifts like smoke from distant hearths. The prayers carry hope into a sky that seems indifferent, a canvas gray and endless, mirroring the charred remnants of forests beyond the village. Once grand trees now stand blackened and skeletal, their roots gnarled and twisting, grasping at earth littered with bones of beasts and men alike. The scars of famine and disease are written not just in the soil, but in the bowed shoulders of the survivors, each step a quiet testament to endurance. She draws water from the well, the wood groaning under her weight, each drop splashing into the bucket like a small drumbeat of survival. The liquid is icy, almost unbearably cold against her skin, yet it is life, and life is stubborn. Around her, others move with similar care, mending torn garments by firelight, tending the meager crops that cling to the frozen soil, stirring ashes in hearths that do not promise warmth but insist upon it. Their faces are gaunt, eyes hollowed by loss, yet in that hollow is a fragile flame of defiance. Each gesture, each measured step, is a quiet rebellion against the famine and fever that have stalked them like wolves for too many seasons. A bell tolls at the ruined chapel, its voice hollow and metallic, carrying across the valley like the echo of something remembered but no longer present. It calls them to endurance, to witness, to the daily ritual of surviving. The sound lingers, refusing to vanish, and even as the mist swirls and hides the far edges of the village, the resonance of faith, or perhaps mere stubborn hope, remains. Children stir at the sound, clutching each other tighter, as if the small warmth of human contact might shield them from the chill that gnaws at their bones. By mid-morning, the work continues in muted determination. The fields yield only meager sprouts, and even these must be coaxed from soil reluctant to nurture life. Tools creak in hands weakened by hunger. The rhythm of labor is unrelenting. Yet, there is a dignity in it, a grace in the quiet defiance. No one speaks much, not out of fear but because the world has grown heavy with words that fail to capture the weight of survival. And still, small conversations slip through, the shared observation of frost patterns, the soft murmur of encouragement, the occasional whispered lament that hangs in the air like mist itself, neither fully claimed nor fully lost. Outside, the forest bears witness to human struggle, silent and stern. The blackened trunks loom like sentinels over the scarred earth, their shadows long and accusing. Wolves, their numbers diminished by starvation, skulk in the distance, eyes reflecting the dim light of a winter sun. Yet the villagers press on, their movements deliberate, their unity a fragile shield against despair. When a child stumbles, a hand reaches out without hesitation. When a bundle of crops fails to survive the frost, another is shared in quiet, unspoken solidarity. Life has narrowed to these small, crucial gestures, yet in them burns a fierce insistence. We endure, we persist, we witness. Evening falls with a sudden hush, as if the valley itself is holding its breath. The mist thickens again, curling around cottages and fences, and the villagers gather around a single shared fire. Flames leap, consuming wood with a ravenous hunger, yet giving back more than they take. A warmth that spreads across frozen cheeks and stiffened fingers. Smoke rises, curling like tendrils of memory, as if the air itself carries the stories of those who came before and those who will not live to see another dawn. Around the fire, faces are gaunt, but eyes gleam with a stubborn determination, a wordless agreement that they will endure what the world has thrown upon them. She watches her children, now closer to the fire, their faces illuminated in flickering amber. One reaches for her hand, small fingers trembling, and she clasps them tightly, letting the heat of the fire and the warmth of touch bridge the gulf of cold that separates them from the unforgiving world outside. In the distance, the ruins of the chapel watch silently, a reminder of faith, loss, and resilience intertwined. Each toll of the bell earlier seems to echo in the crackling flames, reminding them that time continues, whether they are ready for it or not. Night deepens, bringing with it the long shadows of trees and the whisper of wind through skeletal branches. The village becomes a cocoon of fragile life, where silence carries both fear and comfort. A lone dog whimpers somewhere, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the dark. Yet it is met by a human voice softly calling its name, a claim of ownership, of care, of continuity. Each sound, each movement, becomes a statement of existence. We are here, we have survived, and even in this desolate moment, life persists. In that quiet, the woman reflects on the path that brought them here. Hunger has been a constant companion, disease a shadow that stalked them relentlessly. Friends and family have been lost to cold and fever, yet in their absence, a pact remains unbroken among the survivors. They will endure. They will bear witness. They will carve meaning from the hollowed landscape of their lives. The night stretches on, and in the smoke that spirals toward a clouded sky, there is a hint of something sacred, a whisper of hope, a fragile ember, yet bright enough to guide them through darkness. As the fire dies to embers, she leans back against the rough wood of the cabin, eyes fixed on the stars barely visible through the mist. She knows the dawn will come again, relentless in its arrival, indifferent to suffering yet offering a chance to continue. Around her, the village breathes as one, a quiet pulse of life against a world that has taken so much. The pact remains unspoken yet undeniable. They will endure. The memory of loss, the ache of hunger, and the shadow of death hover close, but they do not define the moment. Tonight, the survivors claim their existence simply by holding to it, by pressing hands into each other, by whispering prayers to saints who may no longer listen, by standing against the impossible. And in the lingering gray mist of the early morning to come, when the bell tolls again and the frost glints like glass across the valley, they will rise once more. They will face another day. They will endure. The morning sun slants through the narrow slits of the stone tower, piercing the gloom in long golden streaks. Dust motes float lazily, suspended in the air like tiny spirits, catching the light before settling again on the cold, rough-hewn walls. The tower smells of soot and stone, a scent mingled with the bitter tang of iron. In the corner, a young man kneels, sharpening a rusted knife. His hands are blackened, etched with calluses and the permanence of labor. Every stroke of the whetstone against metal sends a faint metallic cry into the quiet, a small defiance against rust and decay. Sweat glimmers along his brow, catching the light as though the stone itself had claimed a fragment of him. Outside, the village is a shattered reflection of its former life. Roofs sag under the weight of broken timbers. Carts lie overturned, their wheels twisted into grotesque arcs. Fields that once fed the village are scarred with the remains of fire, smoke curling lazily from hidden embers. Here and there, Life clings stubbornly to the earth. A mother stoops, fingers raw and red, coaxing the last grains from frostbitten soil. She mutters soft prayers, half to the gods, half to the ancestors whose hands had sown these lands long before her. Her breath rises in white clouds, mingling with the smoke and morning mist. An elder moves with deliberate slowness across the ruined square, a chant humming from his cracked lips. He traces the edges of worn manuscripts, the pages curling like the wings of a dying bird. His fingers linger over the ink, as though the stories themselves could preserve the souls of those who have vanished. There is a rhythm to these movements, a ritual of remembrance. Each gesture, a bent back, a lifted hand, a whispered word, is stitched into the fabric of survival, a fragile defiance against the encroaching chaos. Birds circle overhead, their cries slicing through the air, piercing the heavy silence that blankets the village. Somewhere, a dog whines, perhaps mourning its master, or perhaps lost to hunger. The wind carries distant sounds. The hollow clatter of abandoned wagons, the metallic ring of armor, the muted lament of those who did not return. The young man pauses, knife in hand, listening. He can feel the history of this place in the cold stone beneath his knees, in the uneven floorboards beneath the tower. It is a weight of memory that presses not just upon his body, but into his very bones. A candle flickers on a rough wooden table, throwing light across tattered clothing and a child's wooden toy, chipped and dulled by years of handling. These tokens, small, fragile, defiant, speak of lives that were interrupted, yet not fully extinguished. The toy is silent, yet it holds the echo of laughter, a sound now swallowed by smoke and stone. The young man touches it lightly, as though by contact he might summon back what the world has taken. For a moment the knife is forgotten. He breathes, slow and measured, anchoring himself in this small space of memory, of care, of persistence. Time seems to stretch and contract within the tower. The sun climbs, shifting shadows along the walls, tracing the edges of old scars and cracks, as though the stone itself remembers the days of fire and fear. Outside, the village moves in quiet persistence. A cart squeaks as it is righted. A woman hauls water from a broken well, balancing the pail as though it contains not merely liquid, but the promise of continuity. The elder's chant grows louder, filling the air with an almost tangible presence, a protective hum against the void. The young man rises, dragging the knife across his palm to test its edge. He feels the bite of metal against flesh, a reminder that survival is measured in moments like this, in the readiness of hand and mind. He steps toward the door, the cold stone pressing against the backs of his legs. Outside, the wind lifts, carrying the scent of charred wheat and wet earth, mingled with a faint sweetness, the memory of summer that once was. Across the village, other survivors move in their own quiet ways. A father repairs the wheel of a cart with hands swollen and blackened, murmuring curses under his breath. Children, too young to understand, scavenge for what remains. A handful of grain, a twisted nail, a bit of cloth to patch a torn sleeve. Each small act is a stitch in the fraying tapestry of life here. Each breath, a testament to endurance. Each glance, a silent acknowledgement of loss. The young man pauses at the tower threshold, eyes sweeping across the village. He notices the smoke curling from hidden embers, the sway of a lone branch in the wind, the glint of sunlight on the blade of his knife. He senses the quiet thread that binds them all, the mother, the elder, the children, even the silent toys left behind. It is a thread of defiance, thin yet unbroken, resilient against the tides of ruin. He takes a step forward, letting the wind tug at the edges of his tunic, listening to the low hum of life pressing stubbornly onward. A crow lands nearby, tilting its head as though observing, weighing the young man's intent. He does not flinch. There is a recognition, almost a communion, between the living and the watchful, the aware and the silent witnesses of this world. The young man's eyes linger on the horizon, where smoke curls into the morning sky, where the outline of distant hills holds both promise and threat. The weight of memory presses still, yet within it lies a strange clarity. Survival is not merely existing. It is the tending of small flames, the gathering of scattered grains, the whisper of names over the dead, the endurance of rituals against oblivion. He kneels again, this time to lift the candle, letting its flicker catch the edges of his face, illuminating the determined set of his jaw. Around him, the village stirs, each motion steeped in the poetry of persistence. The wind carries the cries of birds, the hum of the elders' chant, the faint rhythm of footsteps across stone and earth. These sounds mingle into a quiet symphony, a testament to a world refusing to yield entirely to fire and raiders, to despair and silence. The young man places the candle carefully back on the table, letting its light fall across the child's toy once more. He looks at the knife in his hand, then at the horizon, then back at the fragile tokens of lives still tethered to the earth. In the stillness, he understands. The act of living, of preserving memory, of honoring the vanished, is itself a form of rebellion. Each breath, each careful step, each quiet gesture is a stitch in the tapestry of defiance that stretches across this ruined land. He rises, shoulders straight, and steps toward the open air. The wind greets him, carrying the distant echoes of raiders, the faint smoke of charred fields, and the relentless, humming persistence of those who remain. Above, birds wheel and call, circling in a sky vast and indifferent. Yet beneath their wings, beneath the endless stone, beneath the shadows and ruins, life endures. Not merely in survival, but in ritual, in memory, in defiance. Each small act is a signal to the future. We were here, we endured, we remembered. And in that fragile clarity, the young man understands the burden and the beauty of it all. To live in a world of ruin is to weave, with every gesture, a narrative that refuses to die. The candle flickers once more. The toy lies silent but present, and the wind carries the echoes of a village stitched together by hands blackened with toil, hearts scarred by loss, and the stubborn flame of hope that refuses to be extinguished. Frost glazes the rooftops of the hamlet like a brittle lace, sharp and silent beneath the first pale light of morning. The wooden cross atop the hilltop cemetery shimmers with a fragile brilliance, as though the sun itself is testing the world with its timid fingers. A widow stands beneath it, her shawl frayed and thin, clasped tight to her chest, each thread a whisper of the hands she once held, the voices she once knew. The cold gnaws at her cheeks, a reminder that absence is not only felt in memory but in the air itself. Smoke curls from distant kitchens in slow, deliberate spirals, carrying the faint bitterness of burnt porridge, the earthy warmth of clay ovens, a perfume of endurance in a land that asks too much and gives too little. Children stumble over frozen paths, small feet slipping, hands clutching copper coins and cracked trinkets, remnants of better days, of laughter now distant. Their eyes are wide and hollowed by hunger, yet they press onward, learning early that survival is measured not only in life but in the careful carrying of hope. Every step they take is punctuated by memory. The fevered groans of plague, the ash of burned granaries, the blood that once seeped across the fields in raids long past. Yet, they move with ritualistic care, humming songs their mothers once sang to soothe sorrow into habit, to shape grief into routine. In the heart of the village, animals are tended with meticulous hands. The frozen tails of goats twitch, Chickens huddle beneath rotting straw, and the widow's fingers brush against their fur and feathers as though transmitting warmth by touch alone. Each scrape of frost-laden soil, each tender brush of hay into mangers, is a quiet resistance against despair. A rope swings from the rafters of the communal hall, its thick strands scarred and worn. Not a noose but a pulley to lift bundles of root vegetables, sacks of grain, and firewood, a testament to human ingenuity and shared labor. Here effort is prayer and care is worship. The bells of scattered chapels toll, uneven and hesitant, carrying both hope and sorrow across the low hills. They speak of what survives beyond death, the courage to rise, to keep working, to sing in the chill air when the heart aches for warmth. The widow listens. Her breath leaves a silver trail in the frost, mingling with the scent of smoke and iron. Somewhere nearby, a stray dog curls near a dying fire, ears twitching at cries half hidden in the morning mist. Cries that speak of hunger, of loneliness, of lives stretching taut against invisible threads of survival. She watches the creature, seeing in it the same fragile persistence that carries the small folk of this village from one day to the next. Within the modest cottages, the simple acts of daily life take on sacred meaning. Hands that scrape pots, mend tattered cloth, knead cold bread dough, or coax fire into reluctant flame are not merely occupied. They are defiant. Each movement, precise and deliberate, binds the community together. Every stitch in torn garments whispers of care. Every loaf of bread, burned at the edges or cracked through the center, speaks of sustenance wrested from hardship. Children learn to sweep the hearth and gather water, to measure and ration, to watch for signs of the wolves that roam beyond the pale, and to respect the silence of those who came before. Even the wind is an accomplice in this quiet theater of survival. It whistles through the gaps in wooden walls, threads through the timbers of barns, whispers against the widow's neck. It carries with it stories of travelers long gone, of merchants lost to frostbitten roads, of soldiers whose banners never returned to village fields. The air tastes faintly of iron and ash, mingled with the sweetness of sun-starved herbs and the smoke of half-burnt torches. It reminds every living soul here that history is not written only in stone and parchment but in breaths drawn in cold air, in the ache of muscles worked to exhaustion, in the defiant flicker of candlelight against gathering shadows. Children pass the widow, small voices raised in cautious melody, attempting to weave hope into the fabric of their own existence. Their laughter, fragile as icicles hanging from eaves, echoes briefly before shattering against frozen walls. She watches them, and for a moment, grief is tempered with wonder. The resilience of youth, the stubborn insistence of life. A farmer kneels in his half-frozen field, scraping at the thin crust over root vegetables, whispering blessings to the soil that seems almost hostile in its hardness. Every gesture here, from sweeping hearths to stacking firewood, is imbued with ritual, a silent testimony that even in scarcity, humanity endures. At the edge of the hamlet, the sky begins to brighten, but the horizon is a mingling of light and shadow, a thin ribbon of warmth against the vast cold. The widow lifts her gaze, eyes tracing the curve of distant hills and forests shrouded in mist. In that line between illumination and darkness, she sees not despair alone but possibility, the fragile emergence of tomorrow. Each story carried in this hamlet, every struggle endured, every small triumph, is freighted with significance. They move through life like vessels, bearing memories, losses, and hopes alike, each one a precious cargo entrusted to time and chance. The village continues to awaken around her. The crack of twigs underfoot, the faint clatter of wooden tools, the low murmur of voices rising and falling like wind through reeds. It is in these small gestures, feeding animals, lighting fires, exchanging coins for barley, that the pulse of the human spirit is most visible. There is no grand victory, no heralded triumph, only the steadfast refusal to surrender. And yet, in this refusal, there is an epic story being written, silent and unrecorded in books, yet more enduring than stone. A story of ordinary people resisting the pull of darkness, carrying forward in the teeth of cold and famine, in the shadow of death and the weight of memory. She steps back from the cross, letting her shawl fall to her sides. Her hands tremble, not from cold alone but from the gravity of remembering all that has been lost, and all that remains. The bells toll once more, slow and sonorous, mingling with the murmurs of children and the low grumble of the hearth. The widow breathes in the cold air, tasting the iron tang of life and loss, and turns her gaze toward the horizon again. The first light licks the tips of frosted roofs, melts the sheen of ice on worn paths, and touches the edges of human endeavor. Shadows recede but do not vanish entirely, and light hesitates before spilling fully into the valley. Here, in this delicate liminality, the human spirit bends but does not break. It carries the weight of memory, the ache of absence, and the fragile hope that tomorrow will rise. Stories of endurance are bound into each gesture. The scraping of soil, the stacking of firewood, the soft lullabies to frighten children. Every flicker of warmth, every shared loaf, every step across frozen earth is a rebellion against despair. And as the widow's eyes meet the light at the edge of the world, there is the quiet understanding that life, even in its smallest, most ordinary forms, is a defiance, a testament, a promise. The horizon remains a meeting place of shadow and illumination, a threshold over which the village steps each day. And though frost still clings to the roofs and famine still whispers through the streets, the pulse of survival is steady, a rhythm that refuses to be silenced. In the ritual of ordinary life, in the care lavished on the vulnerable and the frail, in the meticulous tending of what little remains, the people of this hamlet write their own history. It is a history of perseverance, stitched together with sweat and song, sorrow and laughter, suffering and stubborn hope. The widow turns, moving slowly down the hill toward the first stirrings of life below. Her steps are careful, measured, each one a continuation of countless journeys before hers. And behind her, the wooden cross catches the light once more, sharp and unwavering, a silent witness to the endurance of those who rise each morning to face the cold, the hunger, and the weight of absence. She carries with her the knowledge that survival is not merely living. It is the act of remembering, tending, resisting, and believing. And as the hamlet awakens in frozen ritual, in smoke, in whispered prayers, life presses forward, fragile but unbroken, toward the uncertain promise of another day. The smell of wet earth clung to his clothes, a pungent reminder of what remained and what had been lost. The boy moved cautiously through the ruined courtyard, each step a careful negotiation with the splintered wood and jagged stone that littered the ground. Once, this place had known laughter and music, the clang of forging hammers and the rhythm of life unbroken. Now it was a cathedral of absence. Carts overturned like fallen soldiers, walls cracked and shivering beneath the relentless rain, and the echo of every footstep swallowed in the hollow vastness of memory. A shard of sunlight broke through the gray, flickering across the broken flagstones, but it was faint, trembling like the hope that still flickered in the villagers' hearts. From a distant doorway, his mother's voice carried through the mist, quivering yet steady, threaded with exhaustion but never without care. "Steady now, little one," she called, and the boy's lips curved into a slight smile, recognizing in her tone the stubborn endurance that had kept them alive through months of hunger and storm. The rain clattered against the roofless hall, a soft drumbeat that mingled with the crackling of small fires that pierced the chill. Smoke curled from these patchwork hearths, weaving into the morning mist as if the village itself exhaled, struggling to breathe beneath the weight of the ruined keep. Villagers moved through the haze, their tunics patched with every scrap of cloth that could be found, hands red and raw from tending fires, scraping frost from frozen rivers, drawing water from brackish wells that smelled of iron and decay. Each gesture was deliberate, sacred. A shoe stitched closed, a bit of firewood stacked with care, a candle lit with trembling fingers. These were rituals of survival, offerings to a world that had grown indifferent, merciless. The boy paused by a broken gate, fingers brushing the warped wood, imagining the expanse that lay beyond the walls. In the fog, trees loomed like specters, skeletal branches trembling under the weight of ice. And then, without warning, a crow landed on the threshold. Its feathers were so black they seemed to absorb the gray light, its eyes sharp and knowing. It cawed once, a sound that cut through the mist like a bell of warning, or perhaps of encouragement. The boy's chest rose and fell with a quiet thrill. The creature was a herald, not of doom, but of endurance. A faint smile traced his lips, and for a moment, the weight of loss lifted just enough to let a spark of wonder in. Beyond the gate, the ruins of the hall seemed almost to sigh, each fallen beam and shattered stone a story of sudden violence and patient decay. He could imagine the echo of footsteps long silenced, the laughter of children chasing one another across the flagstones now slick with rain, the voices of merchants hawking their wares amid the murmur of prayers. And yet, these memories did not haunt him with despair. Instead, they reminded him of what must be carried forward. Each small act in this frozen dawn, feeding the fire, tending the weak, speaking words of prayer into the mist, was an act of rebellion against oblivion. Life persisted here, stubborn and trembling, in spite of everything. The villagers moved like shadows through the damp morning. A woman bent over a frozen well, breaking the surface ice with a crooked branch, her breath rising in white plumes that mingled with smoke. A man knelt at the base of a toppled cart, arranging potatoes he had scraped from the frost with care that bordered on reverence. Children with faces pale from hunger carried wood, dragging it along the mud-slick ground with grunts and small, determined sighs. Each movement was painstaking, deliberate, as if the world demanded a careful negotiation with the cruelty of winter. And in the rhythm of these tiny labors, there was a beauty almost unbearable. The persistence of ordinary lives refusing to dissolve entirely into the shadows of history. The boy's attention returned to the crow, now hopping along the stones with measured precision, black wings folding like liquid silk. He imagined that the creature had seen centuries pass, had watched empires rise and fall, and had carried the quiet knowledge of survival across generations. The crow's eyes met his, bright and inscrutable, and in that gaze he understood a secret, that endurance is not loud, not heroic in the way bards recount, but a quiet, stubborn refusal to vanish. He crouched, tracing his fingers along a puddle where the rain had collected, watching the reflection of gray sky and black wings ripple in the shallow water. Every ripple, every shift, was a signal that the world remained, despite its scars. From the edge of the courtyard, bells tolled in the distance, muffled by fog but unmistakable in their mournful resonance. They spoke of times past, of lives lost, of hope that survived against the weight of devastation. The boy inhaled the cold air, tasting rain and smoke, earth and stone, and felt the strange mingling of fear and comfort. The village, though battered and bruised, was alive. Every voice, every gesture, every flicker of flame in the gray dawn was a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who remained. Even in silence, the stones spoke, of battles endured, of prayers whispered into the wind, of a world that had nearly forgotten them but could not quite succeed. As he rose, the boy followed the narrow path between collapsed carts and shattered walls, each step a negotiation with uncertainty. He caught sight of a flicker of light, a candle in a window frame, trembling like a heartbeat against the darkness, and remembered his mother's voice, steady and tireless, threading through the morning mist. He imagined her there, hands scarred from work, eyes worn but not broken, moving with a rhythm that carried the weight of generations. And he understood, with a clarity that made his chest ache, that survival was not the mere avoidance of death but the carrying of a story, the quiet insistence that life, however fragile, continued. The crow lifted suddenly, black wings cutting through the gray, and the boy followed its flight with his gaze, watching it disappear into the fog-cloaked horizon. In that movement, he sensed the passage of time, the promise of morning beyond the gray, the whisper of a world that could be reclaimed. Every frozen river, every brackish well, every small ritual of fire and bread and prayer was an act of defiance, a declaration that the people of this ruin would not fade quietly. They were the living memory of their ancestors, the keepers of a story the cold could not erase. And as the bells tolled once more, carrying a sound both mournful and resolute, the boy stepped through the threshold of the broken gate into the uncertain dawn. The rain had softened, leaving the courtyard slick and gleaming, every stone etched with the memory of storms past. The world beyond remained a mystery, vast and gray, but in his heart, a tiny ember glowed, a recognition that even in ruin, even in frost, life's persistence was sacred. Every act of tending, every whisper of prayer, every shared warmth by the fire was an affirmation of existence, a refusal to vanish entirely into history's shadow. The boy smiled faintly, and in that fragile, trembling morning, the first threads of hope wove themselves into the fabric of a new day. The sun rises over a field scattered with the brittle remnants of a harvest, the earth pocked with abandoned tools, their handles worn smooth by the hands that once wielded them. Light fractures across frozen puddles, catching in shards that glint like fractured glass. Each glimmer seems a small rebellion against the winter's cruelty, as though even the sun insists on bearing witness to what remains. A lone elder moves slowly among the ruins, his breath curling into the icy air. His gloves, thin and cracked with years of labor, press against the rim of a plow, tracing its outline as if reading the story etched in rust and splintered wood. He feels the cold seep through, a reminder that flesh and bone are fragile. Yet the persistence of life is something older, something enduring, beyond warmth and comfort. The village exhales quietly, a faint murmur beneath the hard crust of frost. Smoke rises from the few chimneys that still burn, twisting into the sky with the scent of baked bread and damp wool. It is a fragile scent, sweet and sour at once, carrying the essence of survival. In a dimly lit home, a woman hums a hymn older than her memory, each note threading through the silence as she mends tattered cloaks. Her lantern flickers, casting shadows that dance across her wrinkled hands, illuminating the care she pours into each stitch. Outside, the forest waits, silent yet alive, holding secrets in the dark between trees. Wolves move like whispers over the frost-hardened ground, their eyes glinting, ears attuned to every crack of ice beneath human feet. The distant echo of movement is a warning, a reminder that the world beyond the village is vast, untamed, and hungry. Every motion within the village is a quiet defiance. The breaking of ice for water sends a sharp crack into the cold air. Stoking fires releases sparks that float like tiny stars before vanishing into the gloom. Livestock huddle beneath rough shelters, their breath steaming against the frozen boards, and each feeding, each gentle touch, is a claim against the despair that presses from the edges of existence. Children stumble behind adults, carrying bundles of hay or sticks, their laughter thin but piercing. It is a fragile sound, yet it carries, threading warmth into the frost and tension into the quiet. They do not yet know the full weight of famine or disease, yet they learn early that life is fragile, that survival is measured in small acts of endurance. Evening creeps across the village like a slow tide, shadows stretching long against frost-covered walls. Villagers gather near a flickering fire, their forms bending toward its warmth. Words are spoken softly, stories handed down and reimagined, laughter weaving into grief in a seamless, fragile tapestry. The firelight catches on eyes reddened from cold, cheeks flushed with exertion, and in the quiet spaces between voices, the memory of absent kin hums like a low wind. Each story, each memory, is a small anchor against the relentless pull of despair, binding the living, to the past, and to the hope that tomorrow may yet be survived. Smoke rises and mingles with the crisp night air, carrying whispers of prayers, of regrets, of gratitude for a day that was endured and a night that will be faced. Beyond the village, the forest watches. Its trees sway in subtle currents, as if aware of the fragile lives on the edge of its reach. Wolves pass silently, shadows slipping among shadows, witnesses to the human struggle without need of understanding. Every heartbeat, every cautious footstep, is an echo in a world that has long taught the lesson of vigilance. Life here is not generous. It is earned with each breath, each flicker of fire, each stitch in a tattered cloak. And yet, despite frost, disease, and hunger, the village endures. Its people are small, their bodies bent, but their spirits coil tight with the determination to exist. Night deepens, drawing a dark veil over fields and forest alike. The fire dwindles to embers, glowing faintly as if reluctant to surrender its light. Shadows stretch long, entwining with the frozen walls, the traces of yesterday's labor, the whispers of memory. The village sleeps in fragments, children curled beneath threadbare blankets, elders sitting with eyes half shut, still listening for the forest's secrets. Every dream is fragile, yet it is a proof of survival, an act of defiance against the absolute silence that winter threatens to impose. In the darkness, the intertwined threads of memory, survival, and hope hang visible, invisible, woven in the quiet determination of those who refuse to vanish. It is a tapestry built from frost, fire, and flesh, holding together a story that insists upon being told, even when the impossible seems certain. And in the cold, the wind carries a promise, soft, almost imperceptible, that life, however diminished, will press forward. The village, small and stubborn against the endless winter, becomes a testament to endurance, a quiet rebellion etched into the frozen earth. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's cry splits the night, sharp and lonely, yet not without resonance. It reminds the living that the world is vast, that danger and beauty coexist, and that survival is a narrative written in small, persistent gestures. And as the night folds into the first whispers of dawn, the scene holds. A village standing quietly, lives entwined, hope persistent, waiting for the sun to rise once more over frozen puddles and abandoned tools. A ruined bridge arches over the swollen river, its timbers slick with moss and slick with rain, groaning beneath the weight of years and neglect. The water beneath churns with a gray fury, eddies twisting like ancient spirits in unrest. A man kneels at the edge, hands breaking the icy surface, sending ripples outward that vanish into the murmur of the current. He feels it, life and death mingled, the pulse of something older than memory, vibrating through his fingertips, cold and unyielding. Around him, the bridge quivers in the wind, a skeleton of what once connected two worlds, a liminal space between ruin and survival. Beyond, the village clings stubbornly to the forest's edge, its rooftops shrouded in mist that swallows shape and color alike. Smoke coils from chimneys, carrying with it the scent of burning peat and wet wood, of hearth fires kept alive against the encroaching chill. Every wisp is a whispered prayer, a fragile offering to unseen powers, a signal that life persists despite the weight of uncertainty. Children move quietly through narrow streets, strings of wooden beads wrapped around small fingers, learning rituals of endurance even as the wind tears at their cloaks. Their eyes are wide with curiosity and fear, understanding at once the fragility of existence and the unspoken code of perseverance. Elders crouch beside patches of dirt, tracing symbols and letters with calloused fingers. The markings are ephemeral yet sacred, letters of law, fragments of memory, scripts of a time when words were the lifeblood of society, meant to guide, to govern, to anchor. Each gesture, the stacking of stones along the riverbank, the careful scraping of firewood to ignite flames, the patient repair of a splintered cartwheel, is heavy with meaning. It is resistance and devotion all at once, a refusal to surrender to the slow erosion of time. Every movement resonates. Resilience carved in mud, patience etched in sweat, defiance scribed in timber and stone. A raven perches atop the crumbling tower at the edge of the village, black against the gray dawn. Its gaze is both accusatory and watchful, a sentinel in feathers, witnessing deeds that speak of survival and treachery alike. The cry that escapes its throat is jagged and raw, cutting through the damp air like a knife through cloth. Below, the river pounds against its banks, the sound relentless, a drumbeat of eternity, echoing the steady toil of hands that refuse to stop. The man rises slowly, water dripping from his fingers, silver droplets catching the faint light. He squints toward the horizon, where dawn begins its timid conquest, brushing the sky with muted gold and pale rose. Shadows stretch across mossy stones, lengthening and shrinking in a quiet rhythm, as if the world itself breathes with the village. He senses the fragility of their existence, the ease with which it could be snatched away, and yet, in the same breath, he sees its quiet invincibility. Each daily act, small and deliberate, is a line in an unbroken narrative of endurance. Each ritual, each repair, each whispered prayer binds the living to the past and to each other. In the village, women move with practiced grace, carrying water, stirring pots, tending fires. The rhythm of their work is a song, almost inaudible but omnipresent, echoing the heartbeat of survival. Men bend to forge tools, sharpen blades, men torn leather, their eyes reflecting the firelight and the weight of responsibility. Even silence here is intentional, a necessary act to preserve the thread of focus that keeps life intact. It is not the absence of sound but the cultivation of it, the measured balance between noise and quiet, motion and stillness. The bridge, fragile and rotting, mirrors the precariousness of their world. Its planks threaten to give way underfoot, yet it holds just barely, much like the village itself. The river rages beneath it, as if testing their resolve, as if time itself were impatient with human tenacity. And still, life continues. The ritual of hands dipping into the icy water, the careful stacking of stones, the tracing of letters in dirt. Each act is a line in a larger poem, written in gestures that speak louder than words, a testament to the relentless insistence of survival. From the forest, a low wind rises, carrying with it the scent of wet leaves and distant pines. It whispers of hunters and travelers, of unseen dangers lurking beyond the veil of mist. Yet the village does not flinch. It has learned the language of waiting, of watching, of moving with intention. Every eye that peers through fogged windows, every ear tuned to the river's pulse, is a witness to life in its rawest form. The world beyond the village is uncertain, cruel, and indifferent. But within its borders, humanity perseveres, etched in the mud, smoke, and stone of daily existence. The man pauses at the river's edge, feeling the water's pulse linger on his skin. He inhales the damp, earthy air, heavy with the scent of burning peat and the promise of dawn. Somewhere beyond, a child hums a tune to the rhythm of their toil, a song both fragile and enduring. The raven shifts on the tower, wings stretching, preparing to take flight, a shadow cast across the misted rooftops. And the man knows with a solemn clarity that survival is not merely a matter of body. It is inscribed in gestures, in rituals, in the quiet dignity of those who refuse to vanish. He steps back from the river, gaze lingering on the horizon, where light and shadow intertwine in tentative harmony. In the village, smoke spirals higher, voices rise in prayer, wheels turn on well-worn axles, and the unseen threads of memory and tradition weave themselves anew into the fabric of life. The bridge remains, battered but unbroken, a threshold between past and present, between danger and hope. And as the first muted gold of dawn spills across the river, the man senses the unspoken truth, that survival is fragile, yet relentless, and that the human spirit, like the village clinging to the forest's edge, endures because it must and because it can.